Huh? No, it's fine. Okay. But this is not out. This is out, right? So this is not what you see now. No? Or what?
It's good.
Okay.
Don't confuse me now. And, the sound is good.
Okay. Vale.
And the hair was no, by the way.
Okay. Okay, then we start?
If you want to start, it's fine.
Okay. Hi, hello everyone. Good morning. Thanks for coming to one of the main activities this year, for this year festival. Piksel is a festival focused on art and technological freedom, and it has been for 23 years bringing to Bergen all kinds of artists working on the edge of technology with a critical approach. On these 23 editions, the festival has many different themes, but this year the main theme is Perma soils, interdisciplinary strategies for soil recuperation. The prefix Perma is central to Piksel 2025. It offers a conceptual framework for this discussion that we are going to have here. It invokes permaculture, the agricultural practice of imitating ecosystem, Perma Computing, a movement for sustainable digital practices, permafrost, a fragile and rapidly changing ecological system, and permacrisis, the contemporary sense of ongoing instability. This special program includes the seminar, an exhibition at the Studio 207, Piksel headquarters, with the works from Cecilia Johnson, The Toxins Color System, Industrial Era Permafrost by Taylor Alaina Liebenstein-Smith, and Solar for Rain, a punk atmospheric symbiosis from NSA Collective. It also includes the screening of two films, Compost Computational from Marina Otero Bercier, and the Norwegian premiere of the movie Umi no Oya, The Mother of the Sea, by Maya Minder and Ewin Chardonnay. During the screening, we will have also a seaweed and oyster bar, that to continue a little bit this reflection through taste and celebrating the symbiosis between ecosystem, species, and sensibilities from the hands of Maya and Ewin. The seminar focused on soils as archives of care and pollution, witnessing both the human damage and resilience. Through interdisciplinary perspectives, our speakers reveal how people have invented, practiced, and imagined ways of recuperating contaminated soils in different parts of the globe, from South Asia to Norway and the Arctic. At last, I want to thank, because this special program has been a close collaboration with the University of Oslo, and it is rooted in the research project Anthropogenic Soils, Recuperating Human-Soil Relationships on a Travel Planet. I want to thank specifically to Ursula Munster and Nora Bagge for their encouraging work. And this project is also supported by the Research Council of Norway and in collaboration with the Universitet Museum. Thanks for letting us be here. And now I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Davina Kaur Patel. She is a researcher, part of the Anthropogenic Soil project, a medical doctor and anthropologist whose research examines the intersection of health, ecology, and socio-ecological crises. Her doctoral monograph, Unruly Ecologies, explores how scientists and farmers in Punjab navigate the legacies of the Green Revolution and ongoing environmental precarity. Drawing on medical anthropology, feminism, and environmental humanities, her work highlights multi-species care, ethics, and environmental justice. Davina, please, you can. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if I need a microphone, but maybe.
This? Yeah, of course.
Sorry,
Put it here.
yeah, my mother says I speak like a mouse, so still to this day.
Do you want a microphone for the room?
I think I can. Yeah, I think we'll be fine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and to share this talk with you all, which is quite a personal. In many ways, quite a personal talk. And I'm not an artist, so I'm also feel very especially honoured to be here and to learn with and from all of you. So in this talk, I propose to weave ethnographic storytelling that follows the soil care practices and emigration predicament of my interlocutor and co-theorist of soil and capitalism, Parampal. I propose to weave his story together with autoethnographic and reflexive storytelling that follows my ethnographer experiences of revisiting ancestral soils in Punjab during the ethnographic research period of my doctoral research project. This took place between September 2024 and May 2025. So emergently, this talk seeks to contemplate the possibilities for fostering diasporic connection to land, for healing ancestral loss, and for building alternative futures of solidarity and co-liberation that go beyond nationalism, extractivism, and global capitalism through practices of soil care and repair. Practices that reconsider soils as a lively, dynamic, relational entity and as living body within which more than human life is porously entangled, and that reconstitute human soil and more than human relations for a more habitable and just more than human future. So please come with me on this journey of becoming with, healing with soil, towards what I'll later explicate as a futurity of soil-based radical diasporism. So, it was on a modest 1.5 acre plot that I first met Parampal. His farm was located in the middle of a paddy wheat monoculture landscape in the North Indian state of Punjab. It is on these soils that Parampal, a 50-something businessman turned alternative farmer, has cultivated his rebellion. This is a rebellion against the hegemonic forces and more than human pathologies promulgated by extractive agrarian capitalism and by global agribusiness, two interlocking systems that co-expanded under the Green Revolution launched in India from the 1960s onwards. From Parampal's standpoint, the socio-ecological crisis in Punjab, and thus his rebellion, is ontologically and epistemologically located and practiced through the soil. By engaging in methods of soil care and repair, Parampal thus seeks to heal both Punjab's depleted soils and, in turn, more than human health of its monoculture landscape. Stepping over the threshold of Punjab's seemingly infinite monoculture plains and into Parampal's farm was a sensorial transformation, one that remains imprinted upon my corporeal memory even today. It was September 2024, and the intricate of the ecology of the farm initially struck me through its diverse and emboldened shades of colour. A kaleidoscope of textures, shapes, and scents were radiating from its more than human life in tandem, overwhelming my sensorial apparatuses. There was a kind of indecipherable unruliness to the farm. Guava, mango, papaya, and other fruit trees hanging in all which ways, gardening tools dotted here and there, vegetable rows were running in tangential directions. These were scenes that stood in sharp contrast to the neatly circumscribed and undeviating consistency of the surrounding, largely treeless paddy fields. Taking a tour around the farm with Parampal was revealing. It encompassed a purposeful meander through the thick rows of assorted fruit trees, along potato beds gently wrapped in organic mulch, and the stop-off to take a whiff of the pungent fermenting compost juices held in tall cobalt blue barrels. The initial short-circuited binary reading, my initial short-circuited binary reading of Parampal's farm as chaotic and disorderly in relation to the surrounded, ordered monoculture's landscape, was soon undone. Through a processional movement of walking, listening, sensing, inhaling, touching and tasting, and with Parampal's semiotic translations, the intricate more than human community of soil microbes, critters, plants, fruits, insect pollinators, birds and fowl started to expose themselves in their rich complexity. As we continued to tread carefully through the plot, Parampal abruptly turned to face me. Pausing, and with a mischievous grin on his face, he stated, "This is my rebellion." Elaborating further, he described this rebellion as one against the dominant monocropping system of agrarian capitalism within which he was materially, physically, and epistemically surrounded. This was a system that he himself grew up in as a child of agriculturalists who thrived under the rapid expansion of the Green Revolution. Having observed, then later helped and taken over the intensive agricultural techniques performed by his father and grandfather, Parampal was well versed in the Green Revolution's epistemic material and technological practices. However, when he and his wife were diagnosed with celiac disease in their adulthood, and later their children too, he began to piece together the explanatory puzzle. Pesticides, the material substances designed to kill life, were surely the culprit. And as he perceived it, they were also entangled in a broader set of material and technological practices purposed on disrupting the biological rhythms and dynamic flows of soil and plant life for the benefit of yield. His antidote was conceptually simple. What the chaos-waging, agrochemical-intensive farming system had not grasped, and that had only recently dawned upon him, was that agriculture necessitates working with nature, not against it. One day he tells me, "Davina, all of the crises that we're seeing in Punjab, the agrarian crisis, the cancer crisis, the autoimmune crisis, opioid, suicide, pollution crisis, water crisis, these can all be linked to the soil. You know what Confucius said. He said that if you want to destroy a society, you need to destroy its soil. That is so right." So, for more than 5 years, he has been working together with his wife Mandeep and their permanent neighbour Charanjit, this is Mandeep with my kids, to transform the barren soil on the empty plot they had purchased under the COVID-19 pandemic into a healing ecology. This through an ethical practice and approach of what he described as no killing, no tilling, no drilling, grounded in the preservation of soil life and minimal disturbance, recognizing that the polycrises of Punjab were in some way linked to violence upon its soil. On this farm, soil is understood as a living body with vital capacities and has a radical potential to be healing, supportive, and giving of life, but only by working with it, with soil microbes, with the soil life, in ways that support rather than diminish its flourishing, in ways that unlock soil's own agency. And here I'm thinking with scholars such as Karen Barad and her conception of agency not as an individual property of a particular subject or object, but really as a relational quality and a form of enactment, agency as doing and being in its interactivity. Turning to the soil as an ethical, careful response to the embodied injury of the capitalist agricultural system in which he grew up, through practices of thinking and acting through soil repair, emerges as a mode of fostering better more than human relations, as forms of resistance and worlding. That is, creating conditions and relations for coming together in less violent ways, even as we're all in the middle of it. So this is However, looming behind this story of soil repair and recuperation is another dimension, all too familiar to many Punjabi families. Parampal and Mandeep's children moved to Canada 2 years previously, initially as students, but after completing their studies, they decided to stay on. They had made the decision that they did not want to return to India anymore. This is a common story in Punjab in which international migration has risen sharply over the years as the agrarian crisis swells and as youth face high levels of unemployment in a state that's been successively neglected by the central government. For Parampal and Mandeep, being close to their children is crucial, and thus necessitates a move to Canada. A possible diasporic future in Canada, Parampal insists, entails continuing his journey of liberation from injurious capitalist agri-food systems through soil care, repair, and recuperation. This is underpinned by a desire to ensure that he creates a legacy for his children, one that sustains their future liberation from the same system, a legacy different from the one he himself inherited. However, increasingly punishing border regimes and rising geopolitical tensions between India and Canada has led to multiple rejections of their applications for simply visiting visas to the country. Knowing the soil and the rhythms of the land in Canada takes time, he tells me. And Parampal, who's almost 60 years, is consumed, or becomes consumed, by an increasing sense of the finitude of life. He feels he only has 15 or so years, healthy years ahead of him, in which he still has the bodily capacities to care and to cultivate the soil. One day in early 2025, he tells me the following: soil is God, and God and soil have ample amounts of time in this world. They've got thousands of years ahead of them. They're infinite, but my life is finite. And in this finite life, I want to make the most of the time that I have, especially the years that I'm healthy and physically active. This is him. So I'm going to do a bit of a transition here. Of the many things that struck me when spending time with Parampal at this crossroads, his yearning for being with his children in Canada to care and cultivate and repair the soil, to grow with and for his children, the strength of that feeling started to bring up the feelings that I've been carrying for many years of this yearning for the soils and land of an ancestral past that has been lost because of my experience in the diaspora, a yearning that has been undergirded by a sustained and lifelong sense of not belonging as an ethnic minority growing up in the UK and now as a migrant in Norway. So whilst our situations were not quantitatively the same and not in the least equitable, I knew I have passport privileges, for example, but spending time with Parampal and being drawn into thinking closely with the soil under my feet, whilst also being in the region of my maternal ancestry, Punjab, elucidated the ways in which my relations to soil and access to land have been, in many ways, denied by the diasporic experience, by racism, by successive migrations shaped by colonialism, imperialism, and globalization. Meeting and getting to know soil as a lively, vital, dynamic, responsive, and binding living material through this time spent on the farm sparked and expanded my inner urge to return to the soil in which my ancestral roots lie, to return to a place called Preetnagar. So this is part 2. Preetnagar is a village in which I have ancestral roots through Nani, my maternal grandmother. As my desire to return to Preetnagar was ignited and surged during days spent together with my children and partner on Parampal's farm, I became overwhelmed by a curiosity to know Preetnagar's soils, to see and listen to the land, to detect any traces of my ancestors and their soil care practices, to alleviate a long-standing and deep sense of this ancestral loss shaped by the structures and workings of British imperialism. Preetnagar means village of love. It started as a model village in the 1930s and was founded by writer, engineer, and agriculturalist Gurbaksh Singh, a man born in the 1890s who grew up in a humble home in the Punjab town of Sialkot, now located on the Pakistani side of Punjab, a region that was partitioned during independence from British rule in 1947. Gurbaksh Singh had visions of establishing a model village, one inspired by Henry Thoreau's novel Walden, in which more than human and local cultural life would thrive together across religious and other lines of difference in a multi-religious and multilingual landscape that was Punjab at the time. Singh was a passionate person and believed in the importance and vitality of love, to love well, to put love first, to love and show one's emotions, to express them, to try to understand them. This in sharp contrast to the dominant male prototypes of 1930s Punjab. Having been stationed in Rangoon, together with his family at the time of Preetnagar's conception, my great-grandfather, Sindhanjan Singh, who was an engineer in the British Indian Army, had one day caught sight of an advertisement for the plots for sale at this newfound village. Since it was located outside of Amritsar, the family's home city, he snapped up a plot as fast as he could, without seeing the village in the flesh. The plot that he purchased and later built a house on was situated next door to that of the village's founder, Gurbaksh Singh, and they would later become good friends. Still living in Rangoon and unsure of when they'd be able to return to Preetnagar, my great-grandfather and his family were suddenly forced to flee Burma when warnings arrived of an imminent Japanese invasion during the Second World War, in 1942 to be precise. As my indignant 97-year-old Nani, my grandmother, recalls today, her father was allowed to take the well-paved white route due to his status as an army engineer, but the rest of the family had to walk on the black route, which at times required journeying through the jungle and sleeping in makeshift refugee camps along the way, with little food and water supplies to hand. She recalls at one point a generous truck driver gave them a lift part of the way, but that it took over a month until they reached Indian soil. When I came back from fieldwork, I asked her to write what she remembers. She's 97, but she managed to write some recollections from that journey. Little did she know that just 5 years later, she would once again seek refuge in Preetnagar, this time fleeing her student accommodation in Lahore due to the British-officiated partition of India that divided Punjab into two and forced Muslims towards the western side, and now part of Pakistan, and Sikhs and Hindus to the eastern side, now part of India. This is a forced migration that is regarded as one of the largest and fastest mass migrations in global history, one that displaced 18 million people overnight. Preetnagar, its land and its soils, which lay just a few kilometers from the new border on the Indian side, would be once again a refuge for Nani and her family. Fast forward to early April 2025, I had not been able to trace anyone in Preetnagar that could help me to get there. But whilst I was sitting in our rented flat in Punjab's capital city of Chandigarh, I started to search again, and unexpectedly and rather euphorically, I was able to find the number of Gurbaksh Singh's granddaughter-in-law. Before I knew it, we were on the phone together. She remembered my nanny, and thus she and her husband invited us to their home in Preetnagar that they still used part-time. A few days later, my children, partner, and I took the train from the capital city of Punjab, Chandigarh, located on its eastern side, to Amritsar, located on its northern west side. That day in April was scorching, and I distinctly remember thick heat emanating from the land and dust particles from dry soil and wheat swirling in the sky as the wheat harvest was already And it's sort of it's a typical, it's a typical house that the diaspora returned to, and it's peeling and crumbling away. It was inhabited by squatters, there were cows, and yeah. And nobody really ever managed to come back and take care of it because of this family that's been fragmented through empire. As we continued driving, I recalled thinking that there was at least some solace in the thought that the soil must still carry memories of my ancestors. The soil might still carry traces of the ashes that settled on the ground after my great-grandfather's sudden death and cremation in front of the house in the mid-70s. But as we jumped out of the car, I asked Poonam to take me straight away to the plot. We walked past her house, past Gurbaksh Singh's house that was still standing, and she suddenly stretched her arm out. I glanced to my left, and all I could see was a plot of newly harvested wheat straw. So this is kind of the same angle, yeah. I bent down and touched the soil. It was dry, tough, hard, and cracked. It felt thirsty. It felt unfamiliar. I called my mother, who lives in London, immediately. There was a long pause on the video call. We were taking in the weight of what we'd just witnessed. The house was gone, and there were no ancestral traces left. Poonam pointed over to another house, three doors down from the bend in the village path, and said, "That's the farmer that tore down your house." We tried to stop them, but we had no chance. He was adamant, and now it is he who's cultivating paddy and wheat on this soil. I think your uncle tried to challenge it, but he lives in Uganda, and it was very tough. And the irony of the situation at that moment felt like a bit of a thorn in my side. I came to Punjab to research the impacts of the Green Revolution and the paddy wheat monoculture system that has invoked this socio-ecological crisis, and all the while not knowing that it was the same system that, in a sense, has engulfed the place upon which I could stand in this world and say, this is where I'm from, the only place where the question that I've always been asked all of my life, where are you really from, in a way made sense. It felt as though the agrochemicals had killed any traces, and having been with Parampal, killed any traces of my ancestral roots, along with the soil microbiota and critters that these memories co-inhabited, or perhaps at some time co-inhabited with. Yeah, and then I'm not really sure that it didn't really make sense anymore to stand there and feel that that was where I came from. There was, yeah, I'm still sorry, yeah, I'm still sort of processing this. Okay, so just to close, I'll just quickly say something. This is a wall that was built by a Mughal emperor who used to use the village as his hunting grounds on his way to Kashmir. So this is also the only trace that tells you that there was a time that there would have been forest here. Because that's where he sort of went out and hunted, and yeah, gives you a sense of what could have been the landscape also generations back. Okay, so as writer and organic food grower, Claire Rattinan wrote in her memory a memoir, Unearthed. Repair is reclamation, and to me, that has been reclaiming an unbounded relationship with the natural world through growing food, through soil. Something that felt unavailable to me for most of my life, and that continues to be a site of discomfort and disconnection to many who haven't found their way back to it yet. We must seek repair not only for ourselves, she says, but on behalf of our ancestors, those whose bones turned into our bones. We must pursue repair for our descendants so that they might one day know freedom from ancestral trauma while holding fast to the power of ancestral resilience. Repair is not a solo pursuit, even though our journeys are individual ones and the path can be lonely to travel. We must heal in community at the feet of ancestral wisdom and alongside those who seek the same peace as we do. She writes, So a few months later, we returned to Oslo from India. We take a stop in London to visit my grandmother, my parents, and my wider family. And the bittersweet sensations of our departure that was hastened due to the military attacks between India and Pakistan and violent displays of ethno-nationalism were still fresh. I left in India, whose national identity I couldn't identify with, and I arrived to a UK in which I grew up, where the government had recently announced we have become an island of strangers. I was heading towards a Norway in which the far right would make historic gains in the general election with campaign slogans such as, just less migration, that's all. Well, that was actually Høyre, but anyway, yeah, similar rhetorics. When connection to land is bound up with a sense of identity, what does it mean to cultivate the soil where there is no country that I'm entirely welcome in? Somehow, nonetheless, caring for the soil, working through soil repair, being close to the land, also at that time felt like it was the only thing that made sense when I returned back from India. And here I really started to think with the concept of radical diasporism. This is a concept that was, or it was articulated by Melanie Krantowitz. And really she's describing a kind of positive alternative of co-liberation beyond nationalism, one that seeks healing, belonging, and justice alongside all marginalized people. And it's rooted in the revolutionary idea of Doiket from the Jewish Labour Bund, a commitment to the lands you live in, and to be in solidarity and fight for justice where you are. So in late October, and this is still very much early days, in late October, we're in Linderud Community Gardens in Oslo. And this is a place where we had joined after returning to Oslo from India. So in late October, my hands and the hands of my children are in the soil at the community gardens of Linderud Cooperative Farm, where we have joined as active participating members of a local community that is practicing organic farming according to old agricultural traditions of the local area known as Groruddalen. And we're caring for the soil after the topsoil was scraped away and sold many years ago, is a practice of building, nurturing and nourishing relationships with more than human life and community. As I sink my hands into the thick, moist, clayey soil to carefully lift up the swede that is ready for harvest, as I gently cover the topsoil with the glowing autumnal leaves that have fallen from the trees lining the field, I feel something that I've not felt since moving to Oslo 9 years ago. I feel a spark between my body and the living body underneath my feet that crescendos and then relaxes into a calmness, as if the earthing wire coursing through my body has been activated, allowing the chaos of the overland to be absorbed by the underland, giving power over to the soil to shape my sense of belonging. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, who's next?
Internationally. So, Taylor, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Just find my presentation. Right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, just gonna find the video.
The light at the front is super bright. If you could turn that off, we would stay in the front row, but it's too bright.
The air?
That one.
The light?
It's like a spotlight.
The light. Ah,
Yes. But not turn it off. You can keep going, but it's just like,
yeah.
we're all vacating the front row because that's like a searchlight.
I'll ask in at the front desk if it's possible to turn one down and not all.
Yeah, can I add something as a video technician? It's nice to have a light on the speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that light. But I'll ask if it's possible to just turn this one down.
Just leave it, right? We're all comfortable now. But
Or we just have to.
put up something in front of it.
I'll ask. Okay. Should I? That's okay.
Here is not so strong.
Real good here. Yeah, I'm not going back there.
We good? Should I start? No worries. No problem. Yeah, so yes, thank you for the introduction, Maite. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Yes, so I was going to present this project. So the title of my talk, as you can see, is The Poetics of Permafrost in a +2 degree Celsius world. So I am a visual artist based in Oslo, and for about a year and a half I've been working on this artistic research project exploring what I refer to as the poetics of permafrost, which I will come back to a bit later. But the title of the project and the exhibition that you're seeing here is A Feeling of Longing That Freezes and Thaws. So this was a solo exhibition at Atelier Nord in Oslo, which is a video and sound art gallery. And you can also see one of the works at the exhibition at Studio 207. So I've been collaborating with natural scientists in my practice since 2014, and the first time I actually kind of came into contact, so to speak, with permafrost was in Kilpisjärvi in northern Finland when I was doing a residency through the BioArt Society's program called Ars Bioarctica. So I was there, I knew that there was permafrost under my feet, that was what formed the ground, that made the ground solid, but I had absolutely no way of accessing it, neither through my own body or senses, nor through scientific or artistic instruments or technologies. So it wasn't until I moved to Oslo in 2022 that I finally had the opportunity to engage with permafrost in a more meaningful way. So now, as I mentioned, yes, for the last year and a half, at the Center for Biogeochemistry in the Anthropocene at the University of Oslo, I've been collaborating with several researchers. So geoscientists Mats Ipak and Anfisa Pismeniuk, microbiologist Ira Carlson, and also choreographer Tim Winter. So the title of their research project is Peat Thaw, Thawing Permafrost Peatlands, Carbon Source or Sink in a +2 degrees Celsius World, which is a very long title, and that's where the inspiration for the title of my talk comes from. So just to give a sense for what I mean when I refer to the poetics of permafrost, I wanted to start by just reading a text from the artist publication that accompanied this exhibition. And while I do that, I will I will also play a short clip from the 16mm film that also shows some of the field work and my collaboration with Tim Winter, with the choreographer. So I'll just skip ahead a bit here. Let's see. Okay, and there will be some sound as well in the background if it works. So. Yes, so this is how the video was installed, and yes, it's starting now. So I'll just let it run for a sec. Longing is an anachronistic feeling. It has no sense of time. You can long for something that is gone, dead, that is disappearing, dying, or that you have convinced yourself to be eternal. That something hovers at an always near-distant future. Longing demands distance. You can only long for something if it is held at a distance. To grasp or to take hold of the object of your longing is to destroy the feeling of longing in favor of physical contact with the object. To touch a frozen object is to make it thaw, to transfer your longing into its body in the form of heat. But you cannot have it all. You cannot freeze and thaw at the same time. Once you have that perfect, preserved, frozen thing in your hand, you inevitably begin to long for something else. Permafrost is an abstract, I'll just wait a second until people are. Permafrost is an abstract, distant, thermodynamic entity that we once perceived to be eternal. It is defined quite literally as permanent frost, or ground that remains frozen for 2 or more consecutive years. Due to its location between roughly 200 and 300 meters beneath the Earth's surface, it is, by definition, held at a distance from our human bodies. Yet, as it comes closer, collapsing the solid ground beneath our feet, it thaws. As permafrost transforms from solid to liquid to gas, its thaw releases not only methane, carbon dioxide, mammoth carcasses, and zombie viruses, but also man-made chemicals, forgotten technological objects, and the human memories and emotions that accompany them. Everything that has been held down, kept in, bursts from new cracks and folds in the Earth's surface, rushing to the foreground. As the permafrost thaws, we do much more than hold it. We become absorbed in its pervasive materiality. Like a forgotten memory, it begins to haunt us. It would seem that only a very small percentage of humans have touched permafrost. That is to say, very few people have held a small slice of ice and dirt extracted from a long metal tube, pierced into the frozen ground somewhere north of the Arctic Circle in the palm of their hand. And yet everyone has come into contact with an element released from permafrost, whether that is carbon dioxide, methane, water, or soil. And everyone has, or very soon will, experience the shifts in temperature that are defined by its uneasy states, or the physical sensation of freeze-thaw, the tense contraction of nervous energy that thaws into a warm release. As the climactic cycles of freeze-thaw become increasingly unreliable, we desperately seek to control them through technological means. Freezers enable us to control the freeze, preserve, and thaw decay cycles of nearly any being. These energy-demanding devices feed our illusion that we can keep our own DNA and that of other species intact for eternity, just like the permanently frozen Earth. The cryopreservation of a curated selection of life on Earth produces heat. Freezing reveals a longing for control, one last grab for psychological reassurance, basic comfort, and maintaining the illusion that our bodies and our memories can be preserved forever. Held at a distance, the permafrost grazes your skin. You can hear it in this room, thousands of kilometers away, murmuring, heaving, cracking, breathing. And the sound's a bit low, but it's okay. You can hear it a bit. Oh, tack. Okay. And I realized I did not put it on full screen.
In video, you have to press on the video. You have an option.
Yes, okay. Full screen. There we go. Okay, well, the rest will be full screen. Okay, so so that was just a short clip again of the 16mm film that resulted from this project and collaboration. And now I'll just let some documentation from other works from the exhibition run while I'm speaking. So the text, film, and exhibition emerged out of these two distinct experiences of permafrost, as you could see in the film. One of the field work, which is very physical, very immediate, of actually touching and extracting the permafrost from the ground. And the other was the hands of me and my collaborator, Tim Winter, who were in the gallery space and interacting with the projections of the permafrost as they were sort of transmitted from the fieldwork to the gallery space. So as the film shows, I was actually able to finally touch permafrost with my bare hands for the first time last September when I went with my collaborators to Sápmi or to Finnmark in northern Norway. And they were not only taking permafrost cores, but also dissolved gas samples from thermokarst ponds, which are basically these ponds that form when the permafrost thaws. And they use these samples for them in their research to understand carbon cycling processes in these permafrost peatlands. And really to understand in the long term if these landscapes will become a source of carbon or a sink that will absorb more carbon. And this is very unclear to them. The processes are very complex, but essentially they expect that the permafrost in this area of northern Sápmi in Norway will completely thaw or completely disappear within 2 decades, releasing large quantities of greenhouse gases. And the current predictions of a plus 2.8 degree global temperature increase by 2100 would result in the disappearance of half the planet's permafrost, containing more carbon than the atmosphere currently holds as carbon dioxide. So it's pretty extreme. But so while Mats and Fisa and their colleagues used the permafrost samples to analyze the gas emissions and to generate data, I was using the exact same samples, but in a completely different way, as you can see here. So I was using analog technologies to mediate the experience of permafrost in a way. And I chose these technologies because I felt that I wanted to kind of create a contrast between the metagenomics and a lot of the more advanced high-tech digital technologies that were being used by my collaborators, which I felt were making the kind of real lived materiality of permafrost much more abstract. And I wanted to bring it closer to the human body, emotions, and senses. So understanding that I was engaging with a material that is disappearing or becoming obsolete, I decided to use these anachronistic or borderline obsolete projectional devices like slide projectors from the 1960s, magic lanterns from the 19th century, from pre-cinema, and also 16mm film in order to project the samples in the gallery space in Oslo. And so these explicitly dated technologies, we know exactly when they were invented, were meant to create a kind of almost violent contrast with the temporal ambiguity of permafrost, which hovers somewhere between 200,000 and 700,000 years old in a deep space-time that we cannot physically touch. So frozen slices of the permafrost cores taken during fieldwork, as well as water samples, and also bacteria cultures that were grown and cultivated from the permafrost, and finally surface substances like forever chemicals in human tears, which I'll get back to in a moment, were all sandwiched inside the glass plates of 35mm slides and placed inside the projectors, which is what you've been seeing the film of here. And basically what happened is as they were being projected, they thaw. So they were frozen, and then when they went into the projector or became visible, that also involved essentially destroying them or making them thaw. So the process of making something visible is also a destructive process, and that's something I wanted to show through this relationship between temperature, technology, and permafrost. And one of the projectors was actually placed inside of a freezer while it was operating. So the slide would basically go down, be projected for 1 minute, thaw, and then go back into the carousel and refreeze. So you were seeing this kind of freeze-thaw cycle repeating throughout the duration of the exhibition. And this, what you're seeing here, this is a projection from a magic lantern, which is kind of a pre-cinematic projector. That does not have any motor or battery, but it's just a lamp, and that was also placed inside of a freezer. And these projections just thawed throughout the entire month-long exhibition. So it was just one permafrost sample that was then thawed. So there were these different temporalities of freeze-thaw that were sort of operating simultaneously within the space of the exhibition. So basically each work was sort of a different temperature or climate scenario of permafrost thaw. So yeah, lastly, as I mentioned, I didn't only collaborate with scientists, but also with choreographer Tim Winter. And he was sort of also performing in the space and moving between the projections, which were these very large 2 by 3 meter projections of the permafrost thawing. So people, and also during his performance and visitors, could actually see the projections of thawing permafrost on their skin. So it was a very kind of physical experience. As you can see here, you'll see him emerge in a moment. So yeah, so basically, yeah, I mean, this is really showing a lot of the documentation from the exhibition, but it's become a larger artistic research project, and I'm continuing to work with these researchers at UiO, but mostly at the University of Oslo, but mostly now on another project about methane emissions and making these invisible and imperceptible environmental phenomena of climate change not only visible, but also poetic, and creating a different way of relating to these phenomena. So what I've kind of come to find so fascinating about permafrost is how it defies language, scientific discourse, and methodologies. So when I talk about the poetics of permafrost, I understand poetics as an approach that goes beyond language to open up a potential for a relation between humans and permafrost, encouraging alternative means of perceiving what is perhaps one of the most abstract phenomena resulting from climate change. And to touch a bit more on the problem of language and to state how permafrost has been defined in the natural sciences, so as I mentioned a bit earlier, it is simply defined as permanently frozen ground, or a ground that remains frozen for at least 2 consecutive years. So it doesn't have to be very old to be called permafrost. And this comes from the original Russian name, which is Vechnaya Merzlota, which I'm probably pronouncing terribly, but which translates roughly to perpetual frozenness or eternally frozen soil. And the word permanent, defined as existing perpetually, everlasting, especially without significant change, and eternal, which is without beginning or end, lasting forever, have often been applied to permafrost, bestowing it with a kind of transcendence that defies the very real lived transformations of permafrost in the face of climate change. So it gives us a very contrasting understanding of what it really is, so to speak. In Sakan, Yakut, Sami, and other indigenous languages spoken by communities who actually live on permafrost, there is no single word to describe the many states of permafrost, its uses and roles in daily life. So indeed, the relationship between soil and ice, whose bond creates permafrost, is often perceived as the bond between a more permanent substance, soil, and the more impermanent substance of ice. The same goes for life and death. The microbes living in the permafrost are not actually dead, but held in a state of dormancy, and when they are brought back to life, when they are thawed, after being frozen for many years. So the relationship kind of between permanence and impermanence, life and death, when speaking of permafrost, is really riddled with nuances. It is not a black and white relationship. And we're really, when we speak of permafrost, we're trying to sort of fix something in language that does not have any true fixed material form. The more you try to understand it and to grasp it, the more it evades our perception and our touch. So just to conclude, to define permafrost as something stable, geographically situated, predominantly north of the Arctic Circle, and dead does not leave space for all of permafrost's complexity, particularly as it thaws and takes on new forms in a warming world. It is thawing, changing from solid to liquid to gas. Once again, it contains viruses, methane, CO2-producing bacteria and archaea, prehistoric human bodies, perfectly preserved mammoth carcasses, and human technologies. It is both undefinable and pervasive. And now, newer and more toxic permafrost could perhaps be forming. There are some studies that are emerging now at the moment in Canada about human pollutants that have been carried by the wind to the Arctic that fall into the snow and then refreeze and could perhaps remain frozen for up to 2 years and therefore become permafrost. And then they will, of course, thaw, and all of those pollutants will then be released back into the atmosphere again. So because of this research, this is one of the reasons I chose to incorporate forever chemicals into some of the slides with my collaborator, Mats Ipak. And I wanted to show also how, of course, as permafrost thaws, it also mixes with everything that's on the surface, which includes these chemicals and pollutants, but also human bodily fluids like tears, literally blood, sweat, and tears. So we actually collected our tears, me and my scientific collaborators, and we mixed them in with the permafrost and the forever chemicals. So that's what you see here. Actually, that was 2 tears that sort of merged And tears are also invisible, but when you combine them with other substances, they become visible. Yeah, so essentially for me, as a human, I sort of thought of longing as the kind of emotional analog to permafrost. If permafrost were an emotion, it would be longing, as a kind of, I hope, came through in my reading of the text. So it is through longing and this projective analog approach that I have attempted to touch, see, or come into contact with permafrost and try to understand perhaps what it really is. So, thank you.
Maybe you have, if anyone have any question or something, and also for Davine, she was in the previous presentation.
Yeah. I'll take this off as well.
Are you going to have a short break? In that case, I can keep the latter. We do a break now? Yeah. He's an interdisciplinary artist and author whose work spans filmmaking, collective art practices, environmental activism, journalism, and curatorial projects. He is editor-in-chief of the bilingual magazine Makery, co-editor of the Laboratory Planet, and co-initiator of Soil Assembly, an international network bringing together soil conservation, agroecology, the arts, and citizen science. His recent projects include co-editing the Laboratory Planets, Planetary Peasants issue, developing the art marine biology platform Roscosmoe, and co-directing Umi no Oya, a documentary on nori aquaculture in Japan. So with all of you, Iwin.
Works. Thank you, Maite, and thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time in Bergen, and I'm happy to discover the city and all that, and the festival. So, yeah, I have some journals here if you want to get some. I'm going to talk about it. And the talk is called More Than Planet from the Mountains to the Sea, Searching for Planetary Peasants Movement. When we discussed with Maite about the symposium, because as I was said, I'm working very in this many levels, and as interdisciplinary research, I'm not an academic, and we came to. I was part of a program called More Than Planet in the last few years. It was a EU cooperation program with different organizations in Europe, and led by Vaar Society in Amsterdam and with many other partners. And this program started in 22. When we were preparing it and what it comes as a title, More Than Planet, it was also a debate in the humanities, like we actually don't seem to live on the same planet. It was a series of talks and text by Bruno Latour and criticized by Dipesh Chakrabarty. And we found that very interesting to go on that because obviously we don't live on the same planet as, I don't know, Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin, for instance. So despite all the discussion on the Anthropocene and since at least the COP21 and all that, it obviously didn't really go through. We don't understand the planet on the same level. And so we've been looking in this program as a planetarity, in, let's say, the so-called planetary shift in the humanities, in social sciences, which also comes from a law and historian, Dipesh Chakrabarty, who makes a distinction between what we know as a globe and what we know as a planet. For Chakrabarty, the globe embodies a bit of a bias of Eurocentrism linked to so-called Plantationocene or the Capitalocene since the 16th century. So for Chakrabarty, the blue marble will fall under the globe side of the debate because this is how the human eyes will see the planet if you move the sky. Whether the planet is something that has had a lot to do with the condition that allows us to live, but as an entity is different to our existence. The planet, which is a construction, an abstract entity, you can really visualize it. So global warming being historically connected to human endeavors, but the planet has been warming long before, and while we were humans, been going through different climate era. So when people ask the question, can there be life on other planets, they conceptually project to other planets some of the things that they see on this planet as providing for the basis of life. So in that sense, the Earth system is inherently interplanetary in that it both draws on the experience of this planet and other planets, as well as projected science onto other planets. But the globe is what humans have made through the expansion of coloniality, through empire building, through capitalism in general. So what is Earth system science? It's a term that is being used Following the Gaia theory, let's say, Gaia hypothesis from James Lovelock, after a few decades it turned to this definition of Earth system science, which looks at interaction and feedback through material and energy fluxes. Earth system science is a mode of looking at this planet that, in contrast to the global globalization, necessarily has other planets in view. You have to remember that James Lovelock himself was a chemist and working for NASA in the 1960s when he was looking on Venus and other planetary systems when he had got to study actually planet Earth. So Earth system science goes back to this planetary research on a solar system level. Lovelock started to study he went on oceanic trips to measure the emissions from the oceans, which is DMS, dimethyl sulfur emissions that come from whether plankton or seaweed, and in the ocean emissions that contribute to the formation of clouds, for instance, and the albedo. And from that, he realized that there's a feedback loop between the ocean and the clouds. So he started to come with feeling that everything is interconnected and looking at it through space research perspective. And at the end, in the 1983, the NASA itself set the first Earth System Science Committee to gather together many scientists. And we were looking at that through this Modern Planet project, how to position ourselves, how to look differently, whether some of us were coming also from space studies, some were coming from more environmental studies. So, and actually what is also the definition of what's the environment. And if you look historically, the environment before the 20th century, it was the thinkers or scientists were mostly talking about milieu, world conditions. Even Piksel himself was talking more about species-specific Welten instead of a single universal domain. Or Karl Möbius was in Kiel, North Germany, was talking about the biocenosis, how species are connected to their milieu, to their environment, so-called now. But the term environment was not really used in the late and early 20th century. It just started to circulate through, let's say, Darwinian biology or public health and colonial resource management. And it became, in the early 20th century, increasingly institutionalized as a term, but through environmental hygiene, sanitary science, early conservation agencies, soil and forestry management, and also the League of Nations programs. But it relates a lot to still, let's say, a colonial era, and it's only with the creation of after World War II, of the International Union for the Protection of Nature, EUPN, which is now EUCN, Conservation of Nature, that it actually came in as a term officially used, and it was then extensively used since the 1945-1946. One interesting book to look at that, because the EUPN was created in 46, but in 48, William Vogt wrote this book, Road to Survival. So it's one of the texts we start to use the word environment as a key element, and he described it as the sum of total of soil, waters, plants, and animals in which all humans depend. Vogt documents the negative effect of an expanding global population as well on the environment. So there's interesting reports on deforestation, overgrazing, soil erosion, and many forms of destruction of fundamental resources. So it's all rooted in the very specific terms, and interesting to look at that in a critical perspective. And the same, later on in '83, the World Commission on Environment and Development adopted the notion of sustainable development. So development that meets the need of the present generation without compromising the ability of future regeneration to meet their own needs. But as we know, this anthropocentric idea, whether of the environment or the sustainable development, dominated the late 20th century and has become a sort of mantra of green capitalism, which is criticized by, for instance, Paul Ward in The Invention of Sustainability, a book published in 2018, that shows that the idea is rooted much earlier and explains that the modern notion of sustainability largely drew on ideas developed in the late 18th century or early 19th century, when the new understanding of soil science and agricultural practices combined to develop the idea of a circulation of essential nutrients within ecology, and hence allow the perception that disruption to circulatory processes could lead to permanent degradation. Sorry for my English and French, and it's the morning. Another interesting book is called Marx in the Anthropocene, from the Japanese Marxist philosopher Kohei Saito. It's recently published also. Saito explains why Marx's ecology was marginalized and even suppressed by Marxists after his death throughout the 20th century. He's been doing his PhD in Germany and investigating new materials published in the complete works of Marx and Engels, the mega group, so-called Marx-Engels Gesamtstoßgabe, which found out a lot of also letters, correspondence, and it's a really interesting book to read. And in this book, Saito shows how Marx worked intensively to understand soil exploitation under the capitalist system. He looked really closely to Justus von Liebig, the chemist and agronome, who somehow one could say it started also this chemical approach to agriculture, but also with a notion of degradation of soil health by overexploitation could also inform Marx when he was preparing the Capital. So if you go through Saito, you can read also how soil is the core of actually the Capital. So it's Saito in that way of a very novel idea on Marx's alternative to capitalism should be adequately looked through soil health, and he advocates for a more recent book about degrowth communism. So that's just a little bit to contextualize the work we done in Mars and Planet. I mean, it was multidisciplinary, a lot of fields were researched. Myself, I went already through those preliminary thinking. This is just, I'm going to show you a few photos of images of some events or projects. So here it was a symposium in Paris in 2023 called the Mars and Planet Ocean, Space, Ocean Relation edition. He was looking also again through, for instance, James Lovelock impact, looking at the ocean and how it's feedback with the clouds, and also the space observation of the planetary condition, space systems, as well as more like ocean practices. I mean, artists dealing with micro. We had one day on the micro level and one day on the macro level in that symposium. We also developed a program. I'm from Brittany, west coast of France, and I worked with the Marian station, some scientists there. We established a platform called Roscosmos, which is supporting different research in our artist project in relation to the marine environment. Even Taylor was like somehow supported also through that program to come to Brittany, to a marine station. And we had, let's say, a thread of research called Homo photosyntheticus, which is also a term based on Lynn Margulis, who look at some marine symbiosis and coined that term in one book called Microcosmos, where she look and take example of some symbiosis you find actually on the western Brittany coast. So we found out he was interested. So we went to see many scientists and asking them what is this idea of Homo photosyntheticus from them. So from marine biologists, of course, but also we went to the European Space Agency, people looking at spirulina culture for circular system in space stations. At the ESA, we went to see various also artists that approach this kind of issues, such as Chimera Rosa or Robertina Sebianic, Spela Petric, and various. I'm not going to be too long on that. It's also, you can also watch them on the oceanarchive.org platform, where you have all these interviews with various people. Here it's also a project that we supported. It's Maya Minder who is going to speak afterwards. So just to brief introduction to it, it's called Green Open Food Evolution. It's also starting with a question about, same at the Marian station, we found out there were some papers that shows that there was a lateral gene transfer between the seaweed microbiota and the human microbiota in Asian populations. And we started to look at that, how if food can have a evolutionary, like do we evolve through what we eat? And so we started, Maya also developed this project with more like a kitchen lab, like with growing spirulina, also fermentation, and also asking many questions around that, and developed even a platform to gather some recipes called Mikul. She will probably tell more. I'm going to go a bit faster. We have also one project in Finland, Photonorth in Hulu. Look, they went to the deepest mine of Europe and looking also at many levels, whether it is used for analog astronaut research at in the deepest of the deepest, or whether they look at also a presence of life and all that. So we also worked with Aerocene initiative led or initiated by artist Thomas Saraceno, but based in Berlin with a large international network. And we put a book together that looked at the impact of rocket science on the environment, which is something that's not enough. People not enough talked about it, so we put a book together to look at that. We had different labs. Here it's at Ars Electronica Festival, the Modern Planet Lab with mapping workshops. Another one in Slovenia at the Nordeng Center with here Draga Givandino and the Project Atoll group. This is exhibition there. We did with we had an artist in residency from Slovenia, Mia Godek, to work on the symbiotic animal, and he developed this kind of, let's say, lunar module for sending a symbiotic species in space. We also had a project with a collective called Disnovation. They worked on the idea of edible currencies in history and what would be today, and they came with like monitor concept, 1 square meter of a spirulina culture throughout that project. Looked also at algae blooms whether here in Bourges, Centre France. So we developed a series. What? No source found.
Yeah.
It's maybe the cable. Yeah, sorry. It's just a connection. Yeah. Up like this. Better. Yeah. So actually, I'm getting a glass of water. So here it's Bourges, Centre France, which is a city with a lot of marshes, and we looked at algal blooms during the heat waves, early July and end of June, which is of course related to soils on hydrosoils, and all agriculture can impact the marshes when with the heat waves, that suddenly you get a lot of algal blooms. We also had there a regional assembly as well, where we looked also on the local level, gathering all the different people involved in soil ecology or watersheds in the Centre France region. Some events. Also looking at what's perma circularity, which is a perma-circular is a composite of between permaculture but also circular economy. It's coined by Christian Arnsperger and Dominique Bourg from Lausanne University. And we have found it really interesting, I mean, because it's also this critique of the appropriation of circular economy by ideologies of growth, or what's so-called good growth in the gated societies of the new green capitalism. There's an interesting diagram whether you look at holistic or segmented, and then skeptical and optimistic, and of course you get to look at this perma-circular. So maybe actually I'm not a good example here. I've been coming here from a bit afar, and so the question of whether we have also more perma practices is also a question. Another idea we were looking at, I mean, this is related also to the newspaper, the notion of the great acceleration, which started in the 1950s. I mean, if you look at this sustainable or like green growth, actually it just goes on with since the 50s as a development, and it seems like it's not really, the green capitalism is not really bringing a degrowth as like advocated, for instance, by Kohei Saito. So this is a bit the question, this great acceleration has been a founding principle of research with a project where I do with a graphic artist and collective called Bureau d'études. It's a newspaper, you can get copies, the Laboratory Planet. It's usually a research newspaper for us. We are not academics, but we like to start projects by doing research, and we do this newspaper in that case. So we look at the planet as a laboratory. It's always like say yes, since 1945, or since the beginning of the Great Acceleration. So different issues here, usually connected to some big events, or like this one, 2016, was connected to the COP21 in Paris, and last year we did this one here, the Planetary Peasants program, because through the More Than Planet project, we thought like, okay, let's look this notion of planetarity, because by doing these soil assemblies, very local and hybrid events with a lot of local initiatives connected to agroecology, permaculture, artists turning to farmers. We wanted to know, is there like a network of these so-called planetary peasants? So it was also connected to a program in Germany where we, in this year, led by Werkleis, which is an organization and festival in Halle. And they had a program called Planetary Peasants in the context of the anniversary of the 500 years of the peasant revolts in Europe, which is the biggest uprising of before the French Revolution, let's say. So they were having a large program in Germany. So this is a text from the curator, Alexander Klose, on the planetary peasant research. We also, through the soil assembly, we have it was initiated in India, so we also have a lot of contributions from our Indian colleagues. Here, Vivek Vilasini, an artist who is also having initiated a farming project. Another one called Sarajpura Kuris in Bangalore, and different projects. We also, Bureau d'études Collective did also a chart of, a birth chart of the Anthropocene, which again look at the globe as a, some perspective to be criticized, and whether Earth or more this planetary studies will look at more like also peasants, indigenous people, and all those various social and peasant uprisings in different places, which has claim a different perspective. Newspaper was just released now in Portuguese, and a 4-pager for the COP in Belém, and the soil assembly is also featured in that one. It was happening in Ecuador last May. Maya is going to give a bit of a word to that, and we are preparing now a Spanish edition of the newspaper. I want to come to one specific text I've been working on. along the work on the Modern Planet and the laboratory planet research in the last few years, I've found some really interesting correspondence with philosophy of the Scottish biologist and urban planner Patrick Geddes. It's funny enough, to me, he was a biology student in the 1870s, 1880s. He came to Roscoff, the city where I'm from, and at the marine station where I work, and started to look at the same animal, plant, worms where we were looking at during this program. So it became really became intrigued as he moved slowly from this being a specialist in symbiotic relationship between animal and algae. Then he moved slowly towards urban planning. He came to West France as a student of Thomas Huxley, who was the author of, at the time, Physiography, an introduction to the study of nature, when Huxley studied the Thames watershed and extended the methodology to all kinds of types of watersheds in different books. So Geddes got really into this relation between land to sea, between the watershed to the ocean, and it came with different. It changed somehow his life because he moved from biology to landscape architecture, landscape planning. He also encountered the geographer Élisée Reclus, who was an anarchist geographer and who just published at the time History of Stream, which reflects on the social and environmental relations in watersheds. Also, interestingly, Patrick Geddes and his wife organized a series of summer meetings of art and science from 1883 to 1899. The summer school was intended to be interdisciplinary, bringing together arts and crafts, biology, botany, agroecology, geography, economics, and politics. Geddes is also known to have he wanted to mobilize the hands, the earth, and the head, and he's also the one who came, credited for that at least, with the slogans "Learning by Doing" or "Think Global, Act Local." And this also came during these art and science summer schools. He also hosted, like, from Ernst Haeckel to Élisée Reclus and Piotr Kropotkin, who was also advocating this mutual aid between animal and plants, or animal and humans in society on the planetary. So he became a kind of a pioneer of bioregional planning, which is also acknowledged by Dominique Bourg and Ansperger from the Perma circular theory. So this is just one of the diagrams. He designed this valley section, which goes from the mountain to the sea, and all these different social activities, and all this, as a previous slide say, like it needs a whole region to make a city or port city. For us, it also became really inspiring as a Bureau d'Etudes Graphic Collective, doing a lot of maps that he did, many diagrams. He was calling them thinking machines, and we went looking through this many of his old diagrams from like 125 years ago now. Super interesting research. He became, after that, an urban planner. So he moved, after working with whether Reclus or Kropotkin, he started to work on urban planning. And during World War I, he moved to India and worked on different, about even 50 urban plans theory during that time. He developed a vision of urban planning that is emphasizing green infrastructure and urban farm, as well as the management of urban water flows and water bodies based on everyday practices, habits, and rituals. I was saying like almost 50 urban plans for India, not really implemented, but some are not quite known for Madras, Mumbai or Dhaka, and where he's working on this notion of waterways in urban planning. He was emphasizing that neglecting and sacrificing local water bodies in favor of large state projects aiming at stimulating colonial trade would weaken the local economy and ecology. with repercussions for the environment and population. This is so he was not really capable of implementing, even if when he, in 1917 he proposed to revive Dakar by means of rejuvenating the water bodies, and he advocated to improve the occupation-based traditional enclaves along the river and the preservation of open spaces and natural elements. Since the report was alienating, let's say, powerful citizens or rich people, he was not adopted. But then he eventually got invited to work on the urban plan for Tel Aviv. And this is, so he designed what it's called now the Old North of Tel Aviv, and it was implemented from 1925, 1930. So mostly known for that, it's a centenary of the Geddes Garden city of the Old North of Tel Aviv, where he's, every block you can see was hosting gardens, and he's been working on that. So I think, this year I was invited to work with the Starts for Water program, and of course I had this a bit in mind, researching that. So it's a Horizon program, art and science, where artists do residencies, whether in research center, science, or eventually innovation related economy. And so I was working on this in the context of, for instance, doing a bit of the curation and text and designing this is for the UN conference on ocean. And so looking a bit more about this relation, trying to see what really flows in our watershed, what outdoor soils management influence this leaching of substances and material from fields to the water courses. So looking at different impact on watershed, and again, with my interest in algal blooms, looking how this is being created through the different fluxes going into the watershed. So it's just few graph designs, and I've been looking at, especially because I come from the seaside, and I somehow come also from a land and sea farming and fishing families, on my mother and father's sides. So it's a bit of a conflict always on the coast. We have a lot of algal blooms where I live, and like green tides, and it's linked a lot to farming, which contributes through nutrient pollution from fertilizer, marine runoff, and manure runoff, sorry, which adds excess of nitrogen and phosphorus. So this is always been a conflicting situation where I'm from, and I started to now try to work on a project which will be able to create more dialogue between these land and sea people, and whether farmers and fishermen, or even the marine biologists and the forest managers. And I'm working now on this, trying to define this kind of more a bit of a relation. So it's just, for instance, just some space views on algal blooms. In that context, I also looked at the notion of sponge cities. I was in China for a long 1 month residency, and I've been looking at this landscapes, let's say, of this so-called ecological civilization of the Chinese Communist Party. And you have it's very ambivalent to see some of the landscape, but what's interesting, I found interesting, was the notion of sponge city, which has a philosophy. So it was proposed by the landscape architect Kong Yang Yu, so emphasizing of the implementation of hydroecological infrastructure, so focusing on prevention of floods and stormwater management with green infrastructure instead of purely relying on drainage system. So it's to distribute rainwater at source, but it's also to slow down water. It flows away from its source, clean water, to clean water naturally, and to adapt water at the thing when water accumulates. So it's kind of a contrast to the conventional solution of grey infrastructure, which will tend to centralize and accumulate water using big reservoirs, whether it is to protect cities, but also for industrial agricultures. In France, we have big issues around this big reservoir ideas and policies. And so the theory of sponge city emphasizes, those basic principles of like based on nature, source control, local adaptation, to preserve urban ecology space as much as possible. You can see, of course, China is a bit at the forefront of that, but as we see already, Geddes 100 years ago was also looking at that for whether in India or elsewhere, more than 100 years ago. But here you have some examples of, like this is in Singapore, before and after, when they start to transform these urban areas with this idea of sponge city. Like cities like Shenzhen or Shanghai have implemented rainwater harvesting, green roofs, permeable pavements on large scale, and which not yield to notable reduction in flooding and also water reuse. But it's not only happening in China, like Rotterdam City has also implemented different programs, including this Living Land project, the sponge garden, that I also found really interesting. Which is also using different also permacultural techniques like Google culture or hydroponics and so forth to soil health and improve soil health. I'm going to close to also few photos from, because it's been disturbing landscapes of China, because I visited 1 month and we were looking at aquaculture. I've been working on the movie you're going to see this afternoon on aquaculture in Japan, and now looking at China, which is a very, very different context. First, because it's massive, and it's not only seaweed, it's also shrimps, crabs everywhere. But each site we visited had also energy production, massive infrastructure in the same location, which was kind of disturbing. This is near Ningbo. The Ningbo is the biggest tonnage port in the world, on the other side of the Bay of Shanghai. Shanghai is the second one, so it's really massive port industries there, and where you have a coal mining power plant, just in fishing, really next to fishing villages or aquaculture places. So I've been looking at this so-called ecological civilizations, because China has a kind of, it's 1 billion people. It's a possible, the sustainability and China role will be unquestionably central, but it's also neglected somehow in many transition studies. So even if China's environmental efforts and credentials are unquestionably problematic, but also singularly confronting the current situation of ecological breakdown and planetary crisis. We could say the so-called Anthropocene. They call it Shangtai Wenming, or ecological civilization in Greco-Latin, but Wenming is more traditionally understood as a combination of culture and light, which is translated to civilization in Chinese, and Shangtai is used in China as a modern term for ecology, but it's, we have eco logos. And so, but it finds actually roots more Shangtai in Buddhism or Taoism, between wisdom and birth, as rooted in roots, etymological roots. So since 2007, the concept of ecological civilization has guided China's environmental and energy policy, but we all know now that actually the energy demand is really high. The rare earths come from China at 60%, and they process 90% of rare earths, so they have a very strong demand also in energy. And nevertheless, they have this ecological civilization formally inscribed in the People's Republic Constitution, since 2018, and this is considered one of the pillar of Xi Jinping politics for the next 25 years. So it can be as defined by the scholar Wang Hongbo, who I quote, ecological civilization can be read as a hypothetical concept that describes the alleged final goal of social and environmental reform, implying that the changes required in response to global climate disruption and social injustices are so extensive as to require another form of human civilization, one based on ecological principles. But yeah, when you visit some of the places here, it's shrimp farming on a massive scale, and then you're in the coast, and then you have all this offshore wind farm, which is really close, and then you have all the seaweed fields between the wind turbines. So it's kind of disturbing landscapes. I've been reading, and I will quote also text, really interesting. I recommend David Tyfield and Fabricio Rodriguez. The text is Against and For China's Ecological Civilization, Economizing the Bios, the Bios, or Lifeizing the Transition. And so they say we should look at this Chinese ambivalent program, let's say between Sponge City, but also all this energy and a very intensive farming for food, which is also energy, right? So we should look at it between two trajectories, whether it's a techno-authoritarian, they say eco-leviathan, or eco-authoritarian program, but also different aspect, which is more, let's say, life-izing transitions, such as a Sponge City, one that learns to live through and with the living. So I quote here, the official project of ecological civilization is in fact unfolding at the very opposite of its proclaimed spirit. But it is also a rapidly moving, multi-layered and contradictory phenomenon. It cannot therefore be assessed by comparison against preset benchmarks formulated to measure the greening of constitutively different, well-established polities in the Western societies. Rather, it must be addressed on its own terms and vis-à-vis its surging and turbulent, not linear and rational dynamics. Here another landscape, which is in Xiapu, 3 hours south of Shanghai, but it's 5% of the edible seaweed production come from this county, which is small. I mean, it's a bay, a large bay, but it's a county, and they have 5% of edible seaweed. So you see it's fields all over the bay. There's no other places. And we can also, at some point I was filming there, and then I look in the background, and then, oh yeah, this is actually a nuclear power plant of 4th generation being built currently in the middle of the bay on the island. So it's also, I mean, there's a lot of tourists coming to take photos or films like I was doing, but you also have this also another energy big facility in this same aquaculture area. Again, Tyfield and Rodriguez says the contrast between respectively Chang Taiwanming as a program of perfecting and rectifying modernity, largely with techno-economic and or state governmental interventions, and as a movement altogether beyond modernity, which is, we could call transmodern, toward a new and hence we could say post-capitalist phase of civilization per se. So is it, it's very ambivalent to look at this, and do we really want, on one hand, this state governmental intervention like this in our regions, or but also could we get also inspiration with this more like transmodern approach or post-capitalist approach? Yeah, well, I mean, this is a photo I recently also saw, like people were sharing mountains covered with solar panels. And I found this one interesting because you also have a big power plant on top of on the right on the photo. So that also gives you a perspective on what kind of landscape this ecological civilization can bring. I want to conclude by showing Going back to Japan, we were talking about Takayama Shigeatsu, who was oyster farmer. It also relates to the film I'm showing this afternoon, which is about seaweed and oyster symbiosis. And Takayama Shigeatsu is a very interesting character who passed away a few months ago. He's an oyster farmer, poet, and writer. He wrote a book called Forest Lover of the Sea. Not sure it's translated into English, but in French it's accessible because he made a, the story is he was oyster farming not like 100 kilometers north of Fukushima, and started to, even before Fukushima catastrophe, started to realize that his oyster farming is impacted by activities along the watershed, the port transformation, the rivers, the ria. He was farming and started to look at it, was trying to figure out what's going on, why we get a disturbance, and he made a trip to France, visited different oyster farming areas. Somehow realized that trees are different. There's a lot more pine trees and in where he was living. So when he came back to Japan and started to put a campaign together, as an artist, he did a lot of workshops with kids and in his fishing village, bringing them to the mountain to they understand what's going on up there, and vice versa, bringing the schools from the mountains who not go so often on the seaside to see a bit of the whether oyster farming, fishing, or seaweed activities. And through that, he put a campaign of reforestation and bringing people to put different trees that will be benefit on the soils and, of course, on the nutrients that can flow in his ria. So I show you an extract of a video. Oh, wow. Oh, shit. I forgot that it's in Japanese. Sorry. We're not connected on the internet. There was an automatic subtitle. Anyway, a few images, but I just explain what he's actually saying. And also, Fukushima was also quite dispersed. Biodiversity was disappearing, and it somehow also contributed to regenerate a bit the biodiversity of the area by doing this campaign. By seeing how they do this in Japan is very different from China at this level. This massive scale of China is very impacting, and the environment there is obviously decades back completely different. Whether Japan are still even if they have a big production, it's still somewhat moderate. Yeah, I mean, I count from here, so it would have been to be, yeah. Anyway, I can take some questions if you want. Maybe I've been long as well. Are we a bit longer? A bit longer. Sorry, I'm sorry. So maybe we move on then. If I've been long, then yeah, we don't go for questions. Maybe we can watch this till the end. It's very short and it's a nice. There is a moment with this reforestation campaign, which actually really put together a lot of people. So I find this really inspiring.